Welcome to No Rares Required, Episode 35, Rakdos, Amass, Aggro. Lord of the Rings, Tales of Middle-earth is approaching its third week. I got a little behind schedule because of the Arena Open, so this week will be a double episode. Rakdos is the top performer of the set, and it's deep enough to support multiple people at one table. As I did last week, I'm going to start including my draft skeletons, but if you're listening to this audio only, don't worry, I will go through each card individually as well. I'm around my 40th draft, and it's getting to the point where I try to be Rakdos every time. Maybe not forcing it, but black is so deep, and by that I mean black has so many above-average commons that you can usually count on black regardless of how strong a signal you send. That said, it's more important signaling-wise to pay attention to your other color, and why you might have heard that the archetype described as red uncommons and black commons. There are two mechanics in the set that Rakdos can take advantage of quite well, Amass and Ring Temptation. I like to think of my approach to Rakdos as which of the two mechanics am I seeing the most. For example, the draft skeleton above is filled to the brim with cards that amass. This archetype has access to some great removal, like Smite the Deathless, Claim the Precious, and Torment of Golem, all at common. I also want to take a quick moment and talk about the land cyclers, Troll of Khazad-dûm and Oliphant, and whether or not you should cut a land. My personal approach has been to look at the curve without them. If you have 7 cards that cost 4 or more without them, then I'm not a big fan of cutting a land for them. But if your curve looks like my draft skeleton above and only has 5 or 6 4-drops, then I think a 1-for-1 substitute works quite well. And to showcase how deep Rakdos is, I figured I'd include my second draft skeleton that focuses more on Ring Temptation. Now, this is a hypothetical situation, but I wanted to include a curve where I'd cut down to 15 lands. 2 4-drops is the top end of my curve, and the ring emblem will give me plenty of looting. In all reality, this is a bit of a dream curve, maybe doable in quick draft against the bots, but I think you're sitting pretty well off if you can get at least 7 cards that trigger the Ring Temptation. But the more the merrier. You'll notice some similarities between the two skeletons, though. They're mostly black, premium removal at common, and really leaning hard into one of the two mechanics. You can get the archetype to work with a mix and match approach, but the more you can streamline it, the better. I just got a 7-1 trophy with a deck that was all about Ring Temptation, off of a Pack 1, Pick 1 Call of the Ring, and a Pack 1, Pick 2 Nazgul. Chat convinced me to cut a land despite having 8 cards that cost 4 or more, but the deck was so good I couldn't figure out what else to cut. And it did end up being a bit of a mix and match, but it hit the benchmark of 7 Ring Temps, and it got the job done. If you want to see the deck list and the gameplay, I'll include the link in the top right corner. Now for the commons. My top common is Claim the Precious. Sorcery speed removal, double pip black, but it triggers a Ring Temptation. I'm not quite at the point where I will Pack 1 Pick 1 this, nor do I think it is a mythic level common, but this is the sort of thing I look to pick up right after the bombs. It's the best removal at common, and it's in the best color, black. This week, I'm not going to focus as much on when the cards are picked at what time, since the archetype is so deep, you don't really need to pilot into the archetype during the draft, and there are many alternatives for many of the cards. Can't find Claim the Precious? Okay, just find some other removal to get the job done. My other top tier common is Dunlin Crebain. A 1/1 flyer makes an excellent ring bearer, but you also get to amass for 2, so it's a 3/3 over 2 bodies, one of which has flying. Yes, please. I gave mythic level status to Preening Champion during March of the Machine, which was a 2/2 flyer that spawned a 1/1 token, but alas, a 2/2 flyer is better at pressuring your opponent, and I'm not at the point where I want to pick Crebain at pick 1, but it is close. At tier 2, we have Torment of Golem. I ran 3 of these in my recent trophy, and I would run a full playset of 4. Taking your opponent's threat, getting information on their hand to play around future plays, and Amass for 2. It's also worth noting that Rakdos has access to several sorceries that create creatures, which I've found particularly handy if you end up against a blue opponent who wants to counterspell your early plays. Also at Tier 2 we have Shelob's Ambush. Every color got a 1-cost combat trick, but black got the best one. +1/+2 and Death Touch for 1 black is okay. We've seen cards like it before, but creating a food token is what puts this over the top. If you count combat tricks like Shelob's Ambush and quasi-removal like Torment of Golem, it's quite easy to get 9 or more removal. So if you have access to both the set's mechanics, Amass and Ring Temptation, plenty of removal, you can start to see why it's performing better than any other archetype. I do want to mention that I tried playing a full playset of Shelob's Ambush, and there is a point where 1-cost combat tricks don't do much, like when your board is empty. Cards like Sam's Desperate Rescue and Shelob's Ambush, they have good stats, but keep in mind that a good card does have limitations, and unlike Claim the Precious and Dunlin Crabane, you're probably better off limiting this to 2. Next up at Tier 2 we have Rally at the Hornburg, a mythic level common for Izzet, which is probably the archetype I will cover next week since it seems to be a crowd favorite and is a real pleasure to play. I put it at Tier 2. The versatility of this card is wonderful. 2 1/1 tokens with haste can be great early pressure if your opponent stumbles. 2 chump blockers has come in handy if I'm trying to get the last bit of damage done through a ring bearer or flyer. Or sometimes it's just a surprise that can catch your opponent off guard and you can go wide enough to get lethal through. My last Tier 2 common is Smite the Deathless. Instant speed removal that exiles for 2 in an aggro deck. Yes, please. I've even hit the Witch King twice already with this card, which is wonderful flavor. A throwback to the days of Incinerate for those that remember Regeneration. Definitely top red removal at common. Now for Tier 3. Relentless Rohirrim is a 4/3 for 4 that triggers a Ring Temptation. If you have 7 Ring Temptations in your deck, then I like this card. If you find yourself lacking Ring Temptation, then I think you should be less interested in this card. Same goes for Uruk-hai Berserker, the 3/2 for 3 black card that triggers a Ring Temptation, which I've even heard labeled as the best black common. I disagree, but if you're doing the Ring Temptation thing, then by all means, get those ring triggers in there. Improvised Club, I also put at Tier 3. I tend to want to have other removal options, but there are plenty of times I check my deck list to see if I can draw into Improvised Club to get that last bit of damage for lethal, and it's definitely a reason to not go to 4 HP or 4 health against a red opponent. You're usually happy to have 1. After that, I think you might be gambling a bit, since like Shelob's Ambush, it doesn't do much if you have an empty board. Coral's End, I also put at Tier 3. The smaller your curve, the more valuable I think Coral's End is, since the ideal card to discard is a land. I also like how this pairs with the looting mechanism of the ring emblem. Playing this and then looting on your attack lets you dig through 3 cards to find your clutch piece of removal or a bomb. The 1/1 is also a great ring bearer. It's also nice if you have something like Shelob's Ambush or Improvised Club that is somewhat of a situational card that you can use Coral's End to filter it out. I've run 4 in a deck, and I think outside of Grixis spells, most of the time that's going to be too much, but I've been happy with 1 or 2 in most decks. My last Tier 3 common is Limbus. Most people think of Limbus when they are interested in extra scry like in Simic, or creating a draw trigger like in Azorius, but I think it really shines in Rakdos. I found myself being short of lethal many times from my opponent's food, and especially if I didn't find a Fell Beast or Shelob's Ambush, I think including 1 Limbus can be a pretty good idea. Now for the uncommons, and the real power of the archetype. In general, I think uncommons are a good guide in this set of what archetype you should end up in. Rakdos has 5 mythic level uncommons that I'm more than happy to take pack 1 pick 1. First up is Voracious Fellbeast, a 4/4 flyer for 4 double pip black that edicts your opponent and creates a food token. Cards that are a built-in 2-for-1 are always welcome in the limited value game. I had originally misread the card and thought it made each player sacrifice a creature. Oops. It's a bit on the expensive end, but it's a great reason to run 17 lands and maybe 1 or 2 land cyclers. Nazgul is also tier S, a 1/2 death touch for 3 that triggers a ring temptation when it enters the battlefield, and gets +1/+1 for every ring temptation, so it's functionally a 2/3. The other thing too is it is a great ring bearer. The death touch and extra booty means that it has to be blocked by multiple creatures to be defeated in combat. The 9 is mostly just flavor text, but if you can get 2 or 3, they work wonders in multiples. I've never done it, but I've definitely faced opponents who had multiples, and it is quite the headache. Fearfire Foes, FFF for short. I've had my board answered by this card more than any other card. Heat Rays tend to trade down in value because of the cost of X in a red, but the 1 damage to each other creature has been incredibly relevant. It's one of the ways to beat Horn of Gondor, and Black Breath, the black sorcery that gives your opponent's creatures -1/-1 with a ring tempt, is arguably main boardable in Best of 1 because of how good it is against red and white. FFF is definitely good enough to take pack 1, pick 1, and I'm happy whenever I open it. Eomer of the Riddermark is also a mythic level uncommon. In my guide to Boros, I mentioned this. During my Arena Open draft, I had to make a decision between Eomer and Radagast, the mythic green, and I'm still not sure I chose correctly. I went with Radagast, but Eomer is one of the set's top performing cards, and cards like Chimney Rabble that can attack with haste and create a 1/1 that can chump can dramatically change the tempo of a race in your favor. My last tier S uncommon is Grishnak, Brash Instigator. It's the threaten or treason of the set. You get a 1/1 that amasses for 2, so that alone makes it good enough. But when you combo this with Amass synergies, it goes over the top. You don't even need to steal and sacrifice. It is an option and a reason to take Improvised Club more highly, but it's usually just good enough on its own. I might be a little too high on this card, but I'm still picking these up pack 1, pick 1. Now for tier 1. I'm not sure which is better removal, Bitter Downfall or Claim the Precious. Bitter Downfall doesn't have a double pip in black and pings for 2, sometimes only costs 1, and is instant speed. But Claim comes with a ring temptation. I think as long as you have 7 ring temptations, Claim wins out, but just barely. And you can see why I don't think Claim should be a pack 1, pick 1, because you have so many options for removal in this archetype. Foray of Orcs I also put at tier 1, and is better the more Amass synergies that you have. You can do silly things like turn 2 Mordor Muster, turn 3 Crebain, and turn 4 Foray of Orcs to deal 5 damage and attack with a 5/5. One of the things that is kind of interesting about Amass is if you have a token in play already, it's sort of like playing a creature with haste, since the power gets to attack immediately. It's best if you have a bunch of removal to prevent the massive army from being chump blocked, and this card does both. Ranger's Firebrand is also great cheap removal, and don't forget that it can damage directly to the face. I put it at tier 1. Again, its value goes up if you get more ring temptation, but even without the magic number 7, I'm happy to pick it up. Golem's Bite I put at tier 2. It's just clunky enough with the 4 mana to trigger a ring emblem that I think it's a tier below its red counterpart, but it functionally does the same thing, which is remove an early blocker so you can aggro your opponent. And it's another card that is a good example of something you can throw away to Quarrel's End or loot away with the ring emblem once your opponent's defenses become too big for it to be relevant. Golem Patient Plotter needs additional ring temptations to be at its best, but it pairs oh so nicely with Grishnak with the built-in sacrifice outlet. And 3/1s are very punching if your opponent stumbles on their early plays. My last tier 2 uncommon is Gothmog Morgul Lieutenant, a 3/3 that spawns a 1/1 for 4. The amount of cards that create additional bodies was why I thought spot removal was going to be a little lackluster, and why I was down on black in general before playing the set. But I was wrong. Removal is always great. Gothmog also gives Death Touch to your 1/1 human tokens off of Rally or Quarrel's End, and is good whether or not you have additional Amass synergies. Now for Tier 3. March of the Black Gate is only great if you have a plethora of Amass synergies, since if they remove your army, you need to be able to rebuild. If you find yourself with 7 or more Amass cards, though, it can really shine, especially if you can clear the path with cheap removal so that it can attack without being destroyed. Both of which are not incredibly difficult to find in this archetype. Book of Mazarbul, I also put it Tier 3. I like it the most in Boros, since you have turn 4 Protector of Gondor to follow up on this card, or in Gruul, where you have several 4-power creatures that you can play on turn 4. Rakdos only has Relentless Rohirrim that I really aim to play, but turn 2 Rally, turn 3 Book, turn 4 4-powered 4-drop is 13 damage of Menace coming at your opponent on turn 5. My last Tier 3 uncommon for Rakdos is Mahor Urkai Captain. A 2/2 Menace for 2 is good, but double pip split mana makes it difficult to consistently get this out on turn 2. If you have 7 or more Amass synergies, though, that army is going to get big very quickly. And now for the rares. Orcish Bowmasters is the top performing rare in the set. It has a whopping 71.5% win rate and a 74% win rate in Rakdos at the time of this podcast. That is absurd. Playing against the card can feel like the game's unwinnable, especially if you are Grixis spells and looking to draw extra cards every turn. Bowmasters costs 2, has flash, and whenever it enters the battlefield or whenever an opponent draws an extra card, you deal 1 damage and amass for 1. And remember that the second level of the ring emblem is a mandatory loot. They have to draw the card, then discard. So this is usually a 3/3 worth of stats across 2 bodies for 2 mana at instant speed that also deals 2 damage split between 2 targets. And that's the floor. It's insane. I've opened up Bowmasters once, and sadly never drew them. Hopefully my luck will change. I mentioned Horn of Gondor in my guide to Boros. The card is indeed busted, and is an easy inclusion in every deck. Call of the Ring is more what a rare should be, in my opinion. Game-winning, some decisions on whether to pay life to draw, but truly influences the game in a way that doesn't feel oppressive. Playing this out on turn 2 and ramping to a level 4 ring emblem, though, usually does win you the game, and if you compare this with Nazgul on turn 3, like I did in my recent trophy, you're going to be a happy wizard. At Tier 3, we have There and Back Again. It's a little slow, but it does remove a blocker and trigger a ring temptation. You have to wait until turn 7 to attack with a 6/6 flyer, and I have yet to see it actually die and turn into 14 treasure tokens. My buddy Isaiah was scheming about having Mirkwood Bats in play for a casual 28 damage. I'm sure someone has lived the dream. I've had my eye on splashing Eowyn since the beginning of the set. You can use Great Hall to cast her since she is a legendary. You can use Treasure off of Swarming of Moria, or do something crazy like play Wizard's Rockets or Shire Terrace, the crappy Evolving Wilds of the set. Personally, I don't splash all that often. I did splash her in my Celestia trophy since it was basically free with WoW's Pathfinder and mini partings, but if I was going to splash in Rakdos, it would be for Eowyn. And now for the Mythics. Andoril, Flame of the West, and Palantir of Orthanc are the busted, colorless artifacts at Mythic that I mentioned in my guide to Boros that have held up well over the first few weeks. They are great and an easy inclusion. Palantir got me to 7 wins in day 1 of the Arena Open, so it holds a special place in my heart. Witch King of Angmar, I've killed with Smite the Deathless more than I've drafted, but I got to pilot a Dimir deck into a powerful 1/3 on Friday that had him. A 5/3 for 3 double pip black. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to you, your opponent has to sacrifice a creature that dealt combat damage to you, and the ring tempts you. Then you can also discard a card and give it indestructible until end of turn and tap it. With the bounce effects in blue and smite in red, I felt like my opponent always had an answer for my Witch King, but cards that demand answers are always good to have. At tier 3, we have Spiteful Banditry. For X double pip red, you deal X damage to each creature, and then whenever one or more creatures your opponents control die, you create a treasure token. And it's an enchantment, so you get that effect permanently. Lovingly dubbed Red Hook Massacre. This plays out better in my head than in reality. Many of the archetypes have good card draw, so I feel like Wraths in general tend to be a little lackluster compared to some other sets. Last but not least, we have Sauron the Dark Lord. I must admit that I'm so adverse to splashing that I've chickened out of playing Sauron the Dark Lord more than once. I do think it's easier to splash in Izzet or blue-red for black than it is to splash blue in Rakdos, but if you aren't afraid of splashing, this is worth it. A 7/6 for 6 ward, sacrifice a legendary artifact or legendary creature. Surprisingly easy to do since ring bearers are legendary, but it ensures that they have to start off with a 2-for-1 if they want to get rid of it. And then whenever an opponent casts a spell, amass 1. Whenever an army you control deals damage to a player, the ring tempts you. And whenever the ring tempts you, you can discard your hand to draw 4 cards. Pretty nice. Since last week I missed an episode being too busy with the Arena Open, this week I'm aiming to catch up with a double episode. Tomorrow will be all about Celestia. So we're going from the best performing archetype of Rakdos to one of the worst performing archetypes. Next week I'm aiming to cover Izzet spells, but if you have an archetype that you would rather see instead, let me know in the comments below, and I'll do my best to make that happen. I haven't just been jamming Rakdos, so I feel like I have a pretty good handle on the 10 archetypes. I hope you found this guide helpful, and especially since Quick Draft just opened up on Arena, I imagine forcing Rakdos could be a pretty nice space to farm some gems. Thank you for taking a moment to hit like and subscribe. It helps me reach new people, and makes the time and energy these episodes take worth it. Good luck with your games and future trophies. Thank you all for the support, and I'll see you tomorrow.